In the rugged and untamed wilderness of what is now West Virginia, a land of dense forests, rolling hills, and shadowy valleys, there lived a man whose very name struck terror into the hearts of Native American warriors. He was Louis Wetzel, known by the indigenous peoples as Death Wind, a name whispered like a cold warning carried by the gusts through the Appalachian Mountains. The moniker was fitting, for Wetzel moved with the stealth and sudden fury of a winter storm, leaving devastation in his wake. Born into the rough life of a settler family in the mid-18th century, Wetzel was shaped by the harsh realities of frontier life from an early age. His childhood was marked by constant peril, as conflicts between settlers and Native American tribes over land were frequent and brutal. Native raids were a looming threat, and as a young boy, Wetzel witnessed firsthand the violence and loss that came with living on the edge of civilization. These experiences did more than harden him. They filled him with a relentless drive to protect his people, but also stoked a bitter hatred toward those he saw as enemies. Wetzel's family had settled in a region where the frontier was still wild and largely unexplored. The land was beautiful but dangerous, with its thick forests providing both refuge and risk. This was the world in which Louis Wetzel came of age, learning to navigate the terrain with an intimacy few could match. From a young age, he mastered the arts of hunting, tracking, and survival. The woods became his sanctuary, and he moved through them as if he were a ghost, unseen and unheard, until it was too late for his enemies. The Wetzel family, like many others on the frontier, lived in constant fear of attack. It was during one such raid that Louis Wetzel's life took a fateful turn. His father was killed by a group of Native American warriors, an event that left an indelible mark on young Louis. From that moment, he vowed vengeance, dedicating his life to the protection of settlers and the elimination of what he perceived as the native threat. His determination transformed him into one of the most feared and formidable frontiersmen of his time. Despite the darkness that seemed to follow him, Wetzel was not without companions. Among the settlers, he was both respected and admired. His reputation for bravery and skill in combat earned him the loyalty of many, and he forged strong bonds with fellow frontiersmen who shared his commitment to protecting their homes and families. In the close-knit frontier communities, trust was a currency of survival, and Wetzel, though fierce, was known for his loyalty to those he considered friends. His exploits were the stuff of legend. Wetzel became infamous for his ability to track Native American war parties through the dense woods, often using their own tactics against them. He would stalk his prey for days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, often alone and armed with nothing more than his rifle, tomahawk, and knife. He was known to boast of his ability to reload his rifle while running at full speed, a skill that gave him a lethal advantage in combat. The native tribes soon learned to fear him, as his attacks were swift, brutal, and often deadly. One of Wetzel's most notorious traits was his hair, which he kept long and flowing, an unusual choice for a frontiersman. It was said that this was a deliberate challenge to his enemies, as native warriors would often take scalps as trophies. By keeping his hair long, Wetzel was not only tempting fate, but also daring anyone to try and take it from him. His boldness and bravado only added to the legend of Deathwind. Though he was a hero to many settlers, Wetzel's legacy is complicated. His relentless pursuit of vengeance and his hatred for Native Americans, born from personal tragedy, often led to acts of extreme violence. His life was a reflection of the brutal and chaotic times in which he lived, a time when survival meant taking extreme measures, and the line between heroism and savagery was often blurred. In the end, Louis Wetzel became a symbol of the frontier itself, untamed, dangerous, and unyielding. He embodied the fierce independence and resolve of the early American settlers, but also the darker aspects of the violent conflicts that shaped the country's early history. The name Deathwind, whispered with both fear and awe, continues to echo through the annals of American folklore, a testament to the complex figure who was Louis Wetzel. Before we dive deeper into the story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update on more thrilling tales from American history. Now, let's take a journey back in time to the late 18th century and uncover the life of Louis Wetzel, one of the most feared frontiersmen to ever roam the Appalachian Mountains. Born in 1763 in the northern panhandle of what is now West Virginia, Louis Wetzel was thrust into a world of peril almost from the moment of his birth. The frontier was a land of wild beauty but also deadly conflict, where settlers and Native American tribes battled fiercely for control of the rich land and resources. Wetzel's childhood was not one of ease or security, but one constantly threatened by the looming specter of native raids. His family, like many others who had chosen to brave the dangers of the frontier, lived in the shadow of violence, their homesteads always vulnerable to sudden attacks. From an early age, Wetzel was no stranger to loss. The volatile relationship between settlers and native tribes meant that the lives of many frontier families were defined by bloodshed. Wetzel's own family was not immune to the ravages of this conflict. His father, who had worked hard to establish their homestead, was killed during a raid. This tragedy deeply affected young Louis, etching a wound in his heart that would never heal. That single event set him on a path that would see him become one of the most feared figures among the Native American tribes. Wetzel swore vengeance, and in the years to come, he dedicated his life to hunting those he saw as enemies, using the wilderness to his advantage in ways that made him a near mythical figure on the frontier. But despite the violence that surrounded him, Wetzel's life was not without moments of community and companionship. On the frontier, where the threat of attack was a constant, settlers banded together, forging bonds of trust and loyalty that could mean the difference between life and death. Wetzel, for all his fierce independence and reputation as a deadly warrior, found strength and solace in the camaraderie of other settlers. The bond between these pioneers was deep, built on shared hardship and the relentless struggle to survive in a hostile environment. In such a world, trust was not just a virtue, but a necessity. Wetzel's reputation among his fellow settlers was one of unwavering courage, and his skills in hunting, tracking, and fighting were admired and respected. In the small, isolated communities that dotted the frontier, men like Wetzel were heroes, figures who embodied the strength and resilience needed to survive. Wetzel's formative years were spent in this environment of stark contrasts, where life was a fragile thing, constantly threatened by the forces of nature and the conflicts between peoples. However, there were still moments of joy and unity. Even in the midst of danger, frontier families celebrated small victories and took solace in their togetherness. Wetzel, while fierce in battle, also experienced these moments of shared joy, whether around a campfire, during a hunt, or in the fleeting peace that sometimes came between raids. These flashes of normalcy were precious, brief respites from the harsh realities of frontier life. As Wetzel grew older, his name became synonymous with both survival and revenge. His skills as a frontiersman were unmatched. His ability to move through the dense forests without a sound, to track his enemies for miles, and to strike swiftly earned him the respect of his peers and the terror of his foes. The Native Americans who had once raided the settlements came to fear the man they called Deathwind. He was known for his ability to reload his rifle while running, a nearly impossible feat that made him even more deadly in battle. Stories of his exploits spread far and wide, often embellished, but always rooted in the cold truth that Wetzel was a man shaped by the violence and danger of the land. Though he had a reputation for brutality, Wetzel's life cannot be understood outside the context of the turbulent times in which he lived. The frontier was a place where the rules of civilization often didn't apply, and survival required both skill and savagery. For Wetzel, his personal vendetta against the Native Americans who had killed his father became the defining mission of his life. Yet his actions, while seen as heroic by many settlers, also cast a long shadow. The complexity of his character, both protector and predator, mirrored the complexity of frontier life itself, where the line between right and wrong was often blurred. In the end, Wetzel's legacy is one of both admiration and controversy. To the settlers of the frontier, he was a protector, a man who had given everything to defend their way of life. To the Native Americans, he was a symbol of the relentless and destructive force that was sweeping across their lands. His life, filled with violence and driven by vengeance, reflects the harsh realities of the time, a period in American history where survival often came at a terrible cost. So, as we reflect on the story of Louis Wetzel, it's important to remember that history is not always a tale of heroes and villains, but rather a complex web of human emotions, motivations, and consequences. In the tight-knit and often perilous world of frontier life, Louis Wetzel forged powerful bonds with those around him, connections that would sustain him throughout his tumultuous existence. Among the settlers, community was not just a choice, but a necessity for survival. The rugged wilderness of what is now West Virginia demanded that people lean on each other in times of hardship. It was within this shared struggle that Wetzel's lifelong friendships and alliances were born, shaped by the collective determination to survive the unforgiving challenges of the frontier. These ties, once formed, were unbreakable, strengthened by the trials of war and the constant threat of death. Wetzel's upbringing played a pivotal role in shaping the man he would become. Growing up in a world defined by danger, he quickly developed a fierce independence and self-reliance. These traits became his trademarks, distinguishing him from others in a community that already prided itself on resilience. Even as a young boy, Wetzel displayed a natural aptitude for wilderness survival, mastering the art of hunting, tracking, and trapping with remarkable ease. The forests that stretched across the frontier were his playground and later, his battlefield. His deep knowledge of the land and its hidden pathways made him a figure of respect, admired by settlers for his unmatched abilities in navigating the dense woodlands. These skills were not simply for sustenance, but became critical in the defense of his people. Wetzel's ability to live off the land, his sharp senses, and his intuitive understanding of his surroundings transformed him into one of the most formidable figures in the region. The respect he earned from his fellow settlers was paralleled only by the fear he instilled in those who dared to threaten his home. Wetzel's reputation as a warrior and survivalist was not the result of isolated incidents, but a lifelong accumulation of experiences that continually tested his endurance and skill. Whether it was a grueling winter or an impending raid, Wetzel's readiness to confront the dangers of the frontier made him a protector to his people. The American frontier during Wetzel's lifetime was not a place for the faint of heart. It was a land of stark contrasts, caught between survival and relentless conflict. While the wilderness offered settlers the promise of freedom and opportunity, it also presented a harsh reality of constant struggle. The forces of nature were merciless, with extreme weather, scarce resources, and dangerous wildlife forming an ever-present threat. Yet, for the settlers, the greatest danger often came from the tense and violent interactions with the Native American tribes, who were defending their ancestral lands from encroachment. The frontier was a battleground, and Wetzel's life was spent on the front lines of this conflict. One of the most volatile regions of this frontier was the Ohio River Valley, a place where the competing interests of settlers and Native Americans collided violently. This fertile and strategically valuable land became a flashpoint in the broader struggle for control of the American wilderness. As more settlers moved westward, the native tribes fought to protect their territories from encroachment, leading to bloody skirmishes and full-scale raids. For the settlers, the Ohio River Valley represented both opportunity and danger, a land rich in resources but fraught with peril. Rival groups, including various native tribes and European settlers, vied for control over the region, each seeking to establish dominance over its vital waterways and fertile lands. In this environment of conflict and survival, Louis Wetzel stood as a formidable figure. His deep knowledge of the land and his unparalleled ability to move through the wilderness undetected made him a dangerous adversary to anyone who opposed him. The settlers, carving out a precarious existence in the Ohio River Valley, relied on men like Wetzel to defend their homes and families from raids. The constant threat of attack was a reality that all settlers faced, but Wetzel's vigilance and skill offered them a sense of protection. His ability to anticipate danger and strike before his enemies could react became the stuff of legend. But Wetzel's role in the conflict went beyond mere defense. He became a symbol of the settlers' resolve to hold their ground, no matter the cost. His relentless pursuit of those he saw as enemies reflected the broader determination of the frontier community to survive and thrive in a land fraught with challenges. However, Wetzel's ferocity in battle and his personal vendettas also made him a controversial figure. His life, like the frontier itself, was a blend of bravery, vengeance, and survival, an embodiment of the complex and often brutal dynamics that defined the American wilderness during this time. Through all the bloodshed and turmoil, the settlers persevered, and the bonds between men like Wetzel and their fellow frontiersmen only grew stronger. They faced each new challenge with an unyielding spirit, determined to build lives for themselves and their families in the untamed wilds. The Ohio River Valley, once a flashpoint of conflict, eventually became a symbol of the settlers' resilience and their ability to carve out a new world from the wilderness. Louis Wetzel's story, intertwined with the fate of the frontier, captures the essence of life on the edge of civilization. His legacy as a fierce protector, skilled frontiersman, and formidable warrior remains a testament to the resilience and determination that characterized the settlers of his time. As the frontier slowly gave way to settlement and expansion, Wetzel's name, like the land he fought for, would be forever etched into the history of early America. As a young boy, Louis Wetzel experienced an event that would forever shape his life and ignite the fierce, unrelenting determination that would come to define him. Captured by Native American warriors during one of the many raids that plagued the frontier, this early ordeal left an indelible mark on his soul. The time he spent in captivity not only forged in him a deep hatred for his captors, but also honed his already sharp survival instincts. Forced to live among the people he would later consider his enemies, Wetzel learned their ways, gaining insight into their tactics and behaviors. These experiences would later make him an even more dangerous and cunning opponent, as he used the knowledge he acquired during his captivity to hunt those who threatened his community. Upon his eventual escape, Wetzel returned to his people with a hardened spirit and a newfound drive to defend the settlers from further attacks. No longer just a boy, Wetzel was transformed by his captivity, emerging as a young man with an intense focus on survival and revenge. He became known for his skill in battle and his ability to wield both the tomahawk and rifle with lethal precision. These abilities, combined with the knowledge he had gained while living among the Native Americans, made him a legend among the settlers. His reputation spread quickly, and he was soon regarded as one of the most formidable warriors of the frontier. His name became synonymous with courage and tenacity, a symbol of the settlers' fight for survival in the untamed wilderness. One of the most famous and often retold stories from Wetzel's life is the dramatic tale of his capture and escape, an event that would seal his place in the annals of American frontier lore. In 1778, when Wetzel was just 15 years old, he and his brother Jacob were tending to their family's cornfield near Wheeling, West Virginia, when they were suddenly ambushed by a group of Wyandot warriors. The brothers, taken by surprise, had little time to react before being overpowered and captured. During the struggle, a bullet grazed Louis' chest, leaving a bloody wound that could easily have proved fatal had it not been for the swift actions of the warriors, who stopped the bleeding to keep their valuable captives alive. The ordeal was harrowing. The brothers were bound and led away from their homestead, facing the very real possibility of death or a lifetime in captivity. However, even in this moment of despair, Louis Wetzel remained calm and observant. His time as a captive in his earlier years had taught him the importance of patience and waiting for the right moment to act. As they were marched deeper into the wilderness, Wetzel studied his captors, noting their routines and weaknesses, all while planning his escape. After days in captivity, the opportunity finally presented itself. One night, as the Wyandot warriors slept, Wetzel quietly worked to free himself from his bindings. His brother Jacob followed his lead, and together they stealthily crept away from the camp. The dense forest, which had been their prison, now became their ally. Wetzel, having grown up in the wilderness, knew how to move through the woods without making a sound. They traveled swiftly and silently, relying on the cover of night to keep them hidden from their pursuers. The escape, however, was not without danger. The brothers were weak, and Wetzel was still suffering from the wound on his chest. Despite these challenges, they pushed forward, driven by the will to survive. For days, they traveled through the wilderness, avoiding detection by moving only at night and resting during the day. Wetzel's intimate knowledge of the land proved invaluable as he led his brother through the forests, carefully navigating toward safety. Their harrowing journey finally ended when they reached the relative safety of a settlement. Their escape not only spared their lives, but also elevated Wetzel's status among the settlers. From that point on, Wetzel's legend only grew. His daring escape, combined with his skills as a hunter and warrior, made him a hero to the frontier settlers. His knowledge of the wilderness, his proficiency with both the tomahawk and the rifle, and his ability to survive even the most perilous situations earned him a reputation as a living embodiment of frontier resilience. He became a symbol of the settlers' defiance in the face of danger, a figure who stood unflinchingly against the threats posed by both the wilderness and the Native American tribes defending their lands. Yet, Wetzel's fame was not without its complexities. His deep-seated anger toward the Native Americans, fueled by his early experiences of captivity and the loss of family members to raids, often manifested in brutal acts of revenge. Wetzel was relentless in his pursuit of those he considered enemies, and his actions, while heroic to some, also reflected the darker side of the frontier conflict. His story, like many from this tumultuous period, is one of survival, but also of vengeance and the blurred lines between right and wrong in a land where survival often came at a steep price. In the end, the tale of Louis Wetzel's capture and escape stands as a defining moment in his life, a turning point that solidified his role as a legendary figure of the American frontier. It is a story of courage, endurance, and an unyielding will to survive, set against the backdrop of a land caught between the forces of nature and the violence of human conflict. Wetzel's legacy, shaped by this and many other exploits, lives on as a testament to the fierce spirit of the early pioneers who braved the dangers of the frontier to carve out a new life in the wilds of America. The Wetzel brothers, Louis and Jacob, were taken deep into enemy territory, surrounded by uncertainty and fear. For 2 harrowing days, they endured the anxiety of captivity, unsure of their fate. Their captors, Wyandot warriors, had no intention of letting the brothers escape, and the journey through the wilderness was fraught with danger. Yet, despite the bleak circumstances, the Wetzels harbored a fierce determination to survive. Louis, in particular, had been shaped by the violence and loss he had already witnessed on the frontier, and his resolve only hardened as the hours of captivity stretched on. Both brothers knew that their only hope lay in biding their time, waiting for the moment when their captors might slip in their vigilance. That moment finally came when the warriors, confident in their captive's weakness, let their guard down. The brothers seized the opportunity and made a daring escape. While the specifics of how they freed themselves from their bonds and evaded their captors may have faded over time, the courage and determination they demonstrated became the stuff of legend. In the dead of night, with only their instincts and knowledge of the land to guide them, the Wetzel brothers slipped away, vanishing into the dense forests that had been their prison just hours before. The journey back to safety was no less perilous than their captivity. They faced the looming threat of recapture, wild animals, and the unforgiving wilderness itself. Louis, still nursing the bullet wound from the earlier struggle, pressed forward, drawing on an inner strength that would define him for the rest of his life. For days, they navigated the dark forests and rugged terrain, relying on their survival skills to avoid detection and find their way back home. The fact that they returned to their family alive was nothing short of miraculous. Their safe return was celebrated among the settlers, and the story of their escape soon spread, cementing Louis Wetzel's reputation as a figure of exceptional bravery and resilience. This experience left an indelible mark on Louis Wetzel. The trauma of capture and the taste of freedom that followed forged him into the warrior he would later become, a man feared by enemies and revered by his peers. It was this experience that helped mold him into Death Wind, a name that would come to symbolize the fierce and relentless struggle for survival on the American frontier. For the Native American tribes, the name represented the lethal, silent force that struck without warning. For the settlers, it symbolized hope and protection in a land where both were often scarce. The world in which Wetzel and his family lived was one of constant peril. Each day brought new challenges, with the ever-present threat of Native American raids hanging over the frontier settlements like a dark cloud. The settlers lived in a state of vigilance, always aware that their homes, their livelihoods, and their very lives could be taken from them at any moment. These raids were not mere skirmishes. They often resulted in devastating losses. Families were torn apart, homes were burned to the ground, and entire communities could be wiped out in a matter of hours. For the Wetzels and those like them, the battle for the frontier was more than just a fight for land. It was a fight for survival. The clash between settlers and Native American tribes was about more than territory. It was a battle for existence itself. The native tribes, whose ancestors had lived on the land for centuries, saw the encroaching settlers as an existential threat to their way of life. They fought fiercely to defend their homelands from the relentless push of European settlers who viewed the land as an opportunity for expansion and prosperity. In this volatile and violent world, men like Louis Wetzel emerged as both protectors and warriors, figures who embodied the settlers' fierce will to survive in the face of overwhelming odds. The relentless nature of life on the frontier meant that every man, woman, and child lived with the knowledge that danger lurked just beyond the edge of the forests. This constant state of threat forced settlers to develop an ironclad resilience. Louis Wetzel became the embodiment of that resilience, honing his survival skills and combat prowess with a single-minded focus on protecting his people. His mastery of weapons, particularly the tomahawk and rifle, made him a formidable force on the battlefield, and his ability to move silently through the woods earned him his infamous nickname. As the conflict between settlers and Native Americans escalated, Wetzel's reputation only grew. He was often called upon to track enemy movements, anticipate raids, and lead counterattacks. His knowledge of both the terrain and the tactics of his adversaries made him an invaluable asset to the frontier communities. Wetzel was not just a man of brute strength. He was a skilled tactician, capable of outwitting even the most seasoned warriors. He became a symbol of hope to the settlers, someone they could rely on in times of crisis. However, Wetzel's story is also a reminder of the complexities of frontier life. The battle for the American wilderness was not a simple tale of good versus evil, but a struggle between two peoples fighting for their survival. Wetzel's actions, while heroic in the eyes of the settlers, were driven by a personal vendetta and a deep-seated animosity toward the Native Americans. The violence that defined his life reflected the broader conflict that was tearing the land apart, a conflict in which neither side could claim true victory. Louis Wetzel's legacy as Death Wind is a testament to the harsh realities of frontier life. His experiences, from his capture and daring escape to his relentless defense of the settlers, paint a picture of a man who was shaped by the violence and struggle of his time. For the settlers, Wetzel was a hero who fought to protect their way of life. For the Native Americans, he was a symbol of the unstoppable force that was driving them from their ancestral lands. His life, like the frontier itself, was a constant battle, marked by moments of triumph and tragedy. The American frontier in the late 18th century was a land of constant struggle, where survival hung in a delicate balance, and both settlers and Native American tribes fought fiercely to defend their way of life. For the settlers, every day was a battle against not only the wilderness, but also the ever-present threat of attack. In response to these dangers, they formed tightly knit communities, relying on one another for protection and support during times of crisis. These bonds, forged through shared hardship, were critical to their survival. Neighbors became like family, standing side by side in the face of danger. Yet, despite these strong connections, the brutal reality of life on the frontier meant that even the closest communities couldn't always guarantee safety. Every individual, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, had to be prepared to defend themselves and their homes. For Louis Wetzel, life in the wilderness was defined by this relentless cycle of conflict and survival. Raised in an environment where danger lurked at every turn, Wetzel learned from a young age that the only way to survive was through a combination of skill, intelligence, and an indomitable will. The wilderness was both his teacher and his battleground, and over time, Wetzel honed his abilities as a hunter, tracker, and scout to a level that few could rival. His sharp instincts, combined with his deep knowledge of the land, earned him a reputation as one of the most formidable men on the frontier. Wetzel became known for his ability to outsmart even the most cunning adversaries, whether they were Native American warriors defending their land or the many dangers of the wild itself. From the very beginning, Wetzel's life was shaped by the violent clashes that defined the frontier. Growing up in a region where Native American raids were a constant threat, he experienced loss and trauma at a young age. His family, like many others, suffered devastating losses, and these early experiences left a deep imprint on him. It was in this crucible of conflict that Wetzel's survival instincts were forged. He quickly learned how to read the land, track animals and people, and defend himself with a rifle and tomahawk. By the time he reached adulthood, Wetzel had become a master of frontier warfare, able to anticipate the movements of his enemies and strike with deadly precision. But Wetzel's skill as a warrior was only part of his legend. What truly set him apart was his ability to navigate the complexities of frontier life, where danger came not only from external enemies, but also from the harsh and unforgiving landscape itself. The dense forests, winding rivers, and rugged mountains of what is now West Virginia were as much a part of Wetzel's identity as his battles. He moved through the wilderness with ease, able to find food, shelter, and safety where others would find only hardship. This mastery of the land made him a valuable asset to his fellow settlers, who often relied on his guidance to survive. Despite the constant threat of violence, there were moments of peace and beauty in Wetzel's life on the frontier. The wilderness, though harsh, also held a raw, untamed beauty that captivated those who lived within it. The settlers, including Wetzel, often found solace in the quiet moments when the land was still and the threat of attack seemed distant. The forests, with their towering trees and abundant wildlife, offered moments of reflection and connection to the natural world. For all its dangers, the frontier was also a place of opportunity, where the promise of a new life in a vast and unspoiled land drew people from across the colonies. Wetzel, like many others, was drawn to this promise, even as he recognized the price that came with it. The peace, however, was always fleeting. The battle for the frontier was unrelenting, and for the settlers, each day brought new challenges. The Native American tribes, defending their ancestral lands from encroachment, fought with equal determination, and the conflict between these two groups defined much of Wetzel's life. The Ohio River Valley, where Wetzel spent much of his time, was a flashpoint in this larger struggle. Both settlers and Native Americans recognized the strategic importance of the region, and it became the scene of countless skirmishes and raids. For Wetzel, every victory in battle was followed by the knowledge that the fight was far from over. The frontier, with all its beauty, was also a place of bloodshed and loss. As Wetzel grew older, his reputation as a warrior continued to grow. His name became synonymous with frontier resilience, and stories of his exploits spread throughout the region. He was known for his ability to outwit his enemies, using the skills he had honed from years of living in the wilderness to strike when least expected. His mastery of both the rifle and the tomahawk made him a feared opponent, and his deep-seated desire to protect his people drove him to continually put himself in harm's way. For many settlers, Wetzel was a hero, someone who stood between them and the dangers that constantly threatened their lives. Yet, like many heroes of the frontier, Wetzel's legacy was complex. His relentless pursuit of vengeance against Native American tribes, fueled by the loss and trauma he experienced, led him to commit acts of violence that some saw as excessive. The line between defense and revenge was often blurred, and Wetzel's fierce dedication to protecting his people sometimes came at a great cost. The frontier was a place where morality was shaped by survival, and Wetzel's actions reflected the harsh realities of the time. His life was a testament to the brutal nature of the struggle for the American wilderness, where every choice had far-reaching consequences. In the end, Louis Wetzel's story is one of survival, resilience, and the unyielding spirit of the frontier. His ability to navigate the dangers of both the wilderness and the conflict between settlers and Native Americans made him a legendary figure, but his life was also marked by the deep scars of that same conflict. For all the peace and beauty that the frontier could offer, it was ultimately a place of violence and struggle where only the strongest survived. Wetzel's journey, like that of so many settlers, was shaped by the constant push and pull between life and death, peace and war, and the relentless drive to carve out a place in the untamed wilderness. The vast, untamed wilderness of the American frontier offered a sense of freedom and opportunity that was unmatched by the more settled lands to the east. For those brave enough to face its dangers, the frontier promised a fresh start, calling to adventurers, settlers, and pioneers seeking a new life. This wild land, however, was not without its perils. The Ohio River Valley, a region of immense strategic importance, became a hotspot for escalating tensions between settlers and Native American tribes. As the conflict intensified, Louis Wetzel found himself increasingly drawn into the struggle, unable to escape the violence and danger that seemed to define his life. Driven by a potent mixture of anger, fear, and a fierce loyalty to his family, Wetzel's transformation into the fearsome figure known as Deathwind was swift and inevitable. Wetzel's skills, honed over years of surviving in the wilderness, made him a legend among the settlers. His proficiency in hunting and tracking, abilities critical to frontier life, set him apart as someone to be relied upon in times of crisis. His fellow settlers, facing the constant threat of raids and attacks, looked to Wetzel for guidance and protection. He had an almost supernatural ability to navigate the thick forests, winding rivers, and rugged mountains that defined the region. He could read the land in ways others could not, predicting the movements of his enemies with uncanny accuracy. Wetzel's deep knowledge of the wilderness allowed him to not only survive, but to thrive in a land where most would falter. Yet, it wasn't just his skill that earned him a place in frontier folklore. It was his relentless thirst for vengeance that truly solidified his fearsome reputation. Wetzel's life had been marked by the loss and trauma that came with growing up on the edge of civilization, where violence was a constant companion. His family had suffered at the hands of Native American warriors, and this pain fueled an unquenchable desire for retribution. Unlike others who might have sought to coexist with the tribes, Wetzel chose a path of relentless pursuit and retaliation. His anger, sharpened by the countless raids and attacks, became the driving force behind his actions. Wetzel's battles with Native American tribes were legendary. He was known for his ruthless efficiency in combat, whether wielding his rifle or tomahawk. His ability to move silently through the forests, striking without warning, earned him the nickname Deathwind. To the Native Americans, he was a fearsome enemy, a ghostly figure who seemed to appear out of nowhere, leaving destruction in his wake. For the settlers, however, he became a symbol of hope and strength, a protector who stood between them and the constant threat of attack. While Wetzel's actions made him a hero in the eyes of many settlers, they also highlighted the darker, more violent realities of life on the frontier. His relentless quest for vengeance, though born of personal pain, often blurred the lines between justice and revenge. His legacy as Deathwind, while celebrated by some, is also a reminder of the brutal and complex nature of the struggle for the American wilderness.